The text landed while I was reaching for oven mitts. Mom, quick heads up. For Mother's Day, we're doing brunch with Lisette's mom. Oh, I only invited her, just the ones who really matter. I stood there with my hand half in the mitt, staring until the screen dimmed and went black. I tapped it awake as if light could change words. It didn't. The letters sat there neat and harmless, like a note on a fridge, like something reasonable people say when they've already decided you won't argue. Heat seeped through the thin mitt. I set the casserole on the counter and steadied myself on the edge. The kitchen ticked in the quiet clock-cooling metal, something settling in the walls. My phone lit again with the same blue bubbles, as if my not answering required another push. It's just simpler. You understand. I'd spent years understanding. Late-night pickups, early morning doctor visits, 100 small rescues that never wore capes. I scrolled up through our thread out of habit, as if somewhere there would be proof of a different son speaking from a different time. Love you, Mom, or couldn't have done it without you. Those messages existed. I remembered them. But the screen only gave me receipts and quick plans. And can you watch Aaron on Friday? I typed, I see. Then erased it. I typed, I already cooked. Erased it. I typed nothing and set the phone face down. I set the table anyway. 2 plates polished until the silver glinted. A folded napkin at each setting. The casserole dish still warm on its trivet. The steam curling up like a reminder that food meant family, or at least it used to. I even placed the small vase in the center, a single stem from my garden propped upright. It felt foolish, but I needed the hope more than the arrangement. I waited. The minutes stretched. I sipped water, checked my phone, scrolled back to the message. It was still there, blunt and merciless. Oh, I only invited Lisette's mom, just the ones who really matter. No apology, no correction. My son's words stood like a wall I couldn't climb. At first, I thought maybe he'd surprise me. Maybe he wanted me to walk into a restaurant and find them waiting. I almost convinced myself of it until the ping of a new notification dragged me to the truth. Photos. There they were, smiling so wide the corners of the frame could hardly hold them. Darian, his arm around Lisette. Lisette leaning against her mother, both of them holding bouquets of tulips. Plates stacked high with pancakes and strawberries, a froth of whipped cream catching the light. My son's grin, one I hadn't seen, aimed my way in years, glowed brighter than the candles flickering on their table. I pressed the phone against the tablecloth as though pushing it away might soften the ache. My fork lay untouched beside the casserole. The seat across from me, empty. I thought of all the years I filled that seat. The nights I stayed up sewing costumes, the mornings I left work early to make his baseball games, the weekends I scraped by so he could have the best shoes, the best chances. Every sacrifice sat in that empty chair, invisible to him now. The casserole cooled. The butter on the rolls hardened. I didn't touch a bite. My hunger wasn't for food, but for a place at my son's table. And that was gone. The afternoon light shifted across the room, golden at first, then fading gray. I sat still, like a shadow anchored to the chair, until the silence became unbearable. I gathered the plates, scraped the untouched food into the bin, and washed each dish slowly, carefully, as though cleansing them might wash away the sting. But no matter how hot the water, the ache clung like grease that refused to lift. When I dried my hands, the house felt hollow. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, louder than they should have, the kind of sound that tells you you're alone. That night, lying in bed, I scrolled through the photos again. The comments beneath them made it worse. What a beautiful family. Lisette's mom looks radiant. So happy you're all together. Together. That word stabbed. Together, and I wasn't part of it. I switched off the phone and stared at the ceiling. My heart thudded heavy each beat, spelling out what I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't needed anymore. Not wanted, not chosen. Morning came, but the heaviness didn't lift. I walked into the kitchen, the clean plates stacked neatly, the table bare now. The sight of it made me realize something. If I stayed waiting, hoping I'd spend the rest of my days staring at empty seats. 3 days did not pass so much as hover. I moved through them, like someone underwater, slow and quiet, the world above me carrying on at ordinary speed. I went to the market for milk I didn't drink, answered a neighbor's hello with a nod that didn't reach my eyes, and slept with the light on as if brightness could talk back to loneliness. I didn't leave that first day. I closed the door and stood in the stillness, and the stillness told me to wait until the tremor in my hands became a steady line. On the third morning, I didn't make a list. I didn't write a note. I took the small canvas bag from the hook by the back door and laid it on the counter. 1 sweater, 2 shirts, a pair of trousers that didn't wrinkle too easily. I tucked my medications into a side pocket, slid in a comb a small bottle of lotion, a notebook with a few blank pages left. No keepsakes. Keepsakes weigh more than they look. The refrigerator hummed like it had something to say, but couldn't form the words. I took the flyer from the magnet on the fridge and folded it twice. Havenfield Children's Center volunteers welcome. I didn't remember when I'd picked it up. At the library, maybe. A bulletin board pinned with lost cats and music lessons and calls for bake sale helpers. I had kept it for months, as if my hand knew before my head did. My phone lay face down on the table. I turned it over and scrolled through our thread one last time, as if there might be a new message I'd somehow missed a correction, sent in the night to stitch the tear. There wasn't. I powered the phone off. The quiet that followed felt like a door closing softly. Outside, the air was cool, the street damp from a night shower. A delivery truck idled 2 houses down. The driver waved. I lifted my hand and kept walking. At the corner, the bus stop bench leaned under the weight of a catalog someone hadn't bothered to take inside. I sat bag on my lap and watched for the number painted on the bus I needed. People came and went. No one asked where I was going. There is a certain freedom in being ordinary to everyone you pass. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes and the faint perfume of rubber and dust. I climbed aboard, fed the fare, and took a seat by the window. The town scrolled by barbershop diner, the old mill with its faded mural. I counted the turns by muscle memory, though I was headed in the opposite direction of everything I knew. Across the aisle, a teen rested his head against the glass headphones on mouth slack in sleep. 2 rows back, a woman in a uniform read a paperback with the corner bent down. The driver checked the mirror and tapped the brake like a metronome, steady and unconcerned with anyone's private storms. It calmed me. There is a relief in traveling among strangers, your life reduced to a seat number. Fields widened, then narrowed again into another set of streets. A hand-painted sign welcomed us to a town I'd visited only for a fair once years ago, when Darien was small, and the ring toss seemed like proof that the world could give you back what you aimed for. The bus turned near a park where children chased each other around a fountain. I told myself that was a good omen. Or I pretended. At the transit stop, I stepped down and checked the folded flyer. 2 blocks east, 1 north. The bag strap cut into my shoulder in a familiar way that reminded me of carrying diaper bags and science fair posters, and once a shoebox for a class pet. I shifted it and kept walking. The building was smaller than I expected. Brick, 2 stories. A blue-painted trim that had chipped at the corners from too many winters. The sign out front was simple, Havenfield Children's Center. The front steps had scuff marks, where many feet had climbed, and on the railing, someone had tied a ribbon that had faded from bright to soft with time. Through the glass, I could see a narrow lobby, a bulletin board with crayon drawings tacked up like flags, and a desk with a jar of pens pushed to one side. A young woman stood behind the desk, flipping through a stack of forms. Her ponytail bobbed when she moved brisk and practiced as if she knew how the day would go, and also knew it rarely obeyed. I paused with my hand on the door, the flyer warm now from my palm. I wasn't sure what I looked like: someone's mother, someone's helper, someone whose name didn't appear on anybody's brunch reservation. I took a breath, the kind that reaches all the way down, and pulled the door open to the smell of crayons and floor cleaner, and the faint, unmistakable sound of children laughing somewhere down the hall. The receptionist looked up, young and unsure. "I sent an email 3 days ago," I said gently. "About helping out. I'm Calvesa Markel." "Oh," she blinked, then smiled. "Yes, Miss Calvesa. 1 second. Miss Calvesa." It had been a long time since anyone said my name like that, with a bit of warmth, not just function. A woman in her 40s appeared, hair pulled back in a clipboard tucked under one arm. "You're early," she said. "But that's not a bad thing. I figured I'd rather be early than in the way I offered." She smiled faintly. "We're never short on hands. Come in." I followed her past the front desk and through a pair of doors into a wide, sunlit room that smelled faintly of crayon wax and soap. Children of all ages were spread across rugs and low tables. Some colored, others played with wooden blocks. A few argued over whose turn it was to hold a fraying, stuffed elephant. The moment I entered, a girl no older than 5 lifted her head from a puzzle and blinked at me. She stood, slowly walked over, and wrapped her arms around my leg before anyone could stop her. "You smell like home," she whispered. I froze. Not because I was startled, but because I felt something break open inside me. Slowly, carefully, I bent down and hugged her back. She was warm. Her little fingers gripped my sleeve like they knew me. "She's usually shy," one of the aides said quietly behind me. I didn't answer. I just let the girl lean into me until she was ready to let go. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of glue sticks and laughter. I sat with a boy struggling to spell his name and listened to a pair of sisters argue about who could draw a better unicorn. A teen in the corner asked if I liked Billie Eilish, and I confessed I'd only heard her name from TV. He grinned. "You'll like her," he said. "She's kinda sad, but honest." Lunch came in paper trays, and I sat with a small group near the back while they asked me questions. "Are you a teacher?" "No," I said. "Are you someone's grandma?" I paused. I was. The same little girl from before took my hand and held it while she chewed her applesauce. No one asked why I looked tired. No one stared at my worn shoes. No one suggested I leave. When the center director came by, later clipboard in hand again, she said, "You're good with them. Do you want to come back tomorrow?" I looked around. One of the boys was mimicking my crossed legs. A girl had fallen asleep beside me with marker still on her cheek. "Yes," I said, "if that's all right." She nodded once. "It is." That night, in the small motel room I could barely afford, I pulled out my bag and counted the few clothes I'd brought. Just enough. I hadn't packed a suitcase because I wasn't sure where I'd be welcome. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was floating. It felt like I had a name again, Miss Calvesa. The next morning I returned before the doors even opened. I didn't know she was a journalist at first. She looked like any other visitor, young, polite, wearing soft jeans and a canvas jacket that still had the tags stitched inside. Her name was Rena, and she introduced herself as someone doing a human interest piece on older volunteers. The director asked if I was willing to be interviewed. "It's optional," she said, "but you've made quite an impression." I hesitated. Not because I had anything to hide. My life had already been emptied out, but because I wasn't used to being seen. Rena sat across from me while the kids painted nearby. She asked simple questions at first: where I came from, how I found Havenfield. I gave quiet answers, clipped but honest. I was a mother, I said eventually, and then I wasn't needed anymore. So I came here. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and wrote something down. The camera came out near the end. "Do you mind if I take a few candid shots?" she asked. "I suppose not," I said. She snapped one of me, holding a glue bottle for Denny, the little boy who still struggled to open anything without making a mess. Another one captured me, wiping applesauce from a child's chin. In one frame, I was sitting on the rug with 3 of them curled around me like I was a storybook tree. After she left, I didn't think much of it. 2 Sundays later, I stepped into the corner store near the bus stop to buy instant coffee. As I waited in line, the front page of the local lifestyle section caught my eye, and my own face stared back. The woman who gave up everything to mother again. The headline read, "My breath caught." I bought the paper and walked all the way back to my motel with it folded under my arm as if someone might rip it from me. In the quiet of my room, I read the article 3 times. It was gentle, kind even. It didn't name names. Just said I'd left behind a life that no longer fit and found something meaningful in giving again. She never raised her voice, but the children listened. They called her Miss Calvesa, like she was something sacred. I set the paper down and stared at the wall. It was the truth, but louder than I would have ever spoken it. The next morning, a few of the staff teased me lightly. One of the aides held up a copy of the paper and said, "Autograph Miss Calvesa." I smiled, shaking my head. I'm not famous, just old. But the children looked at me differently, more curious, more proud. They seemed to understand something had been said out loud, something they already knew in their small, soft hearts. Around midweek, a text came in. "Darian, I saw the article. Are you really working at some orphanage no high?" "No." "Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned the phone face down. It buzzed once more. I didn't look. That night, I tore out the article and taped it gently inside the cover of my notebook. Not because I needed the validation, but because I wanted to remember someone saw me. Without expectation. Without history. The children didn't care where I had come from. Only that I showed up. And I would keep showing up. The next morning, I brought in a new box of colored pencils. The soft kind that don't snap in little hands. The first call came just after lunch. I had just finished sorting finger paints with 2 of the younger boys when I felt the phone vibrate in my pocket. I didn't look. I never did while I was with the children. The center had become the only place where I felt my presence wasn't a burden, and I wouldn't let anything disrupt that. Not even a phone call I already suspected the origin of. After the activity ended, and the last child had been picked up, I walked back to the bench outside the front office. My hands smelled faintly of glue and soap. I reached into my pocket and checked the screen. Darian. Just the name, no voicemail. But a second later, the ping of a text. "You need to stop this. You're embarrassing us." I stared at the message, unblinking. My thumb hovered over the screen. The words weren't surprising, but they still sliced clean. Not a check-in, not a question. Not a single ounce of care. Just control. Image. Shame. I deleted the message. No reply. The silence after was solid. Whole. At dinner, I sat with a few staff in the common room while we heated up leftover chili. They were laughing about something one of the toddlers had said earlier, and I laughed too, though my voice didn't quite rise above the rest. The truth was, I felt heavier and lighter at once. When I returned to my room, I powered off my phone. If I didn't respond, was I erasing myself from them, or simply reclaiming space they never really allowed me to have? That night I couldn't sleep. Not from regret, but from the strange clarity silence brings. I remembered every Mother's Day I had ever spent making things perfect, timing the roast, ironing the cloth napkins, checking the temperature of the side dishes. I remembered waiting each year for a small gesture. Sometimes I got it. Often I didn't. But I had trained myself to accept scraps. Polite apologies. Last-minute flowers. Excuses. And now, here was Darian, grown father of a girl of his own, telling me I was an embarrassment for giving love to children who asked for nothing but time. I turned over in bed, stared at the ceiling, and made a quiet decision. I would not defend my absence. I would not argue for my worth. Silence, I realized, was the only language they might understand. The next morning, I arrived at the center early. I helped prepare the art room, refilled the juice pitchers, and reset the cubbies. One of the little girls, Esty, ran up and hugged my waist. "Miss Calvesa, I saved you a seat," she chirped. I smiled down at her. "Then it's mine forever." That day, none of the staff mentioned the article. They didn't need to. They knew me as I was not a spectacle, not a symbol, just a woman with gentle hands and a steady presence. Later that afternoon, I took a walk around the block during my break. The trees were greening up, leaves rustling in the soft breeze. I passed a flower stand and almost picked something up, but I didn't. I didn't need to bring beauty home. It was already growing inside the walls I'd chosen. By the time I returned, the director met me at the door with a folder. "There's someone interested in bringing you on full-time," she said. "We're short one support lead. Only if you want it." I took the folder in both hands and nodded. I didn't need to think long. The work was quiet, humble, invisible to the outside world. But here it was enough. And for once, I was choosing it on my terms. The fundraiser fell on a Saturday. I had signed up to help with set-up folding tables, stringing banners, wiping down chairs with a damp cloth as the sun climbed higher. One of the older girls, Kes, insisted on sticking by my side the whole morning, shadowing my every move like a second pair of arms. She was the type who didn't speak much, but didn't need to. When she looped her hand through mine to cross the parking lot, it said, "Enough, Miss Calvesa." "You think anyone will come?" she asked quietly, tugging at the hem of her borrowed dress. "They always come when there's lemonade and cookies," I said. And she gave me a tiny smile. By noon, the front lawn of the center had transformed. Kids handed out paper programs. A local band set up in the far corner. The scent of grilled hot dogs wafted through the air, drawing families from the neighborhood. I worked the booth for face painting, though I wasn't an artist by any means. Still, I had a steady hand and a willingness to learn. Tiny foreheads became butterflies and tigers. Some just wanted a glittery heart. A toddler named Tally plopped herself in my lap and refused to move for almost an hour. Another boy insisted I be the one to tie his shoes, even with staff standing nearby. "You're popular today," one of the volunteers teased. I didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't popularity. It wasn't even about being liked. It was about being known. In their quiet way, these children made space for me. Not out of obligation, not out of blood, just because I showed up and kept showing up. When the event ended and cleanup began, Kes found me again. Her dress was stained with chocolate, her curls half flattened. She stood beside me as I rolled up streamers. "You gonna be here tomorrow?" she asked. "I will," I said without hesitation. That night, back in my room at the center, I finally looked at my phone. 7 messages. All from Darian. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We didn't mean anything by it. Can we talk? Aaron misses you. Lisette's mother isn't trying to replace you. You're being dramatic. Please call me back." I stared at the last one the longest. Not because it was kinder, but because it was the only one that asked, not demanded. I didn't open any of them. I turned the phone over, screen down, and let the silence take root again. I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't even angry anymore. But something inside me had shifted, and it wouldn't shift back. The fundraiser had raised $30, enough for new supplies and a summer outing. We'd counted the bills together, laughing over a few sticky ones that had to be peeled apart from lemonade. As I washed the paintbrushes in the utility sink that night, I felt that strange, quiet contentment I hadn't known I was missing all those years. There had always been noise in my life before family schedules, last-minute grocery runs, Darian's scattered phone calls when he needed something. But now, there was steadiness. I had a name here, Miss Calvesa. I had people who looked for me in the morning and said goodnight in the evening, and none of them cared about who I used to be, only who I chose to be now. When I finally laid down in bed, I noticed the moonlight stretching across the floor like a quiet invitation. I didn't feel empty anymore. I felt present, whole. And in the morning, I'd be back in the kitchen making pancake batter with Esty and Kes, who had already claimed Saturdays as our breakfast day. No permission needed. No seat denied. I started knitting again one evening after the children had gone to bed. The center quieted after dinner. The hallway lights dimmed, and the murmur of bedtime stories faded into soft silence. I sat at the small desk near my window, with a ball of soft yarn in my lap, and the wooden needles I'd found tucked in the bottom of the donation bin weeks ago. No one had claimed them. I suppose they'd been waiting for someone like me. The rhythm returned to my fingers without much effort. Cast on, pull through, loop, tighten. My hands remembered what my heart had not dared to recall, the way I once made things for someone who no longer wanted anything I gave. I didn't plan a pattern. I just started. Each row became a soft echo of something I hadn't said, a sentence I hadn't dared to speak out loud, a prayer I didn't think anyone would answer. The yarn was light gray, neutral, warm, not flashy. A child's kind of comfort. Something you hold without even noticing it. The kind of comfort I used to be, I think, before I got in the way of someone else's plans. Erin had grown so quickly. Last I saw her, she was beginning to walk wobbly legs and bright eyes, always pulling at my necklace or crawling into my lap with a book. She used to say Bama for Grandma. I used to think that was enough to anchor me in their lives. Now I wasn't even a name in their stories. Still, I kept knitting. One stitch after another, night after night. After breakfast cleanup, before bedtime. On the bench outside when the sun dipped low and the air turned gold. Esty would sometimes curl beside me watching. "Who's it for?" she asked once. I smiled, not looking up. "Someone who used to sit in my lap, like you do." She didn't ask again. She just leaned her head against my arm and let the moment hold us both. By the end of the week, the blanket was finished. Simple, soft-edged with a border that curled slightly at the corners. I wrapped it in brown paper, no tag, no note, no handwriting to recognize. Just the warmth of time tucked into folds of fabric. The mailing address was easy. I remembered it without trying. I had written it enough times before on birthday cards, on packages Darian never acknowledged, on envelopes that came back unopened. This one wouldn't come back. It would arrive. Quietly. Like me. I walked it down to the post office during lunch break, tucked it under my arm like groceries. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She weighed it, stamped it, and slid it into the bin. And that was that. When I returned to the center, the children were painting paper lanterns in the craft room. Someone had spilled glue, and the table was chaos laughter echoing through the hall. I stepped into the mess and took a deep breath. This was the world I lived in now. Colorful, sticky, loud, honest. Later that evening, I sat with Esty and helped her fold the corners of her drawing into a paper boat. She wanted to float it in the sink and watch it tip. "You think it'll sink?" she asked. "Eventually," I said, "but not right away." That night, I left my phone off again. Not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I didn't want to break the peace that had settled over my room. The blanket was gone. My hands were empty again. But for the first time in a long while, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like space, waiting for something new. The message came in the early afternoon, just as I was slicing apples for snack time. The children were outside in the garden beds digging little trenches for the late summer seedlings. I just wiped my hands on my apron when the vibration of the phone caught my attention. I wasn't expecting anything, at least not anything kind. The screen lit up. Lisette. Aaron got a blanket today. Was it from you? That was it. No greeting, no warmth, no question of how I was. Just a cold thread of suspicion wrapped in a soft lowercase font. I stared at the screen for a while, long enough that the slices of apple began to brown, long enough that I could hear the children laughing in the distance without fully hearing what was funny. She knew it was me. Of course she did. She had seen my work before every baby sweater, every handmade toy. My stitches weren't anonymous to her. She just wanted confirmation without offering acknowledgement. No thank you. No apology. No invitation. I locked the phone and slid it back into the drawer by the coffee pot. It made a hollow sound as if my silence dropped with it. Back outside, Marlo was arguing with Jaden over who got to water which row. I joined them, lifted the watering can, and turned the moment into something less petty and more shared. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I swept the hallway floors and wiped down the tables like usual. My body moved on habit, but my thoughts drifted somewhere between the weight of the text and the absence of any real question inside it. Did she think sending it was enough? Did she imagine I'd be grateful just to be noticed? When I returned to my room, I checked the phone again. No new message. No follow-up. Just that first thread hanging in the air like a fishing line with no bait waiting for me to bite. I didn't. Instead, I wrote out a list of supplies the center might need: new towels, replacement crayons, a second-hand bookshelf if I could find one for cheap. Then I read over Este's drawing from earlier that day. It was of the two of us sitting on the swing she'd painted onto the side of the mural. She had drawn my hair in wild loops and written, "Miss C smells like hugs." That stayed with me longer than Lisette's message did. That night, I left my phone face down and didn't reach for it again. The next morning, I helped set up for a weekend event, a little open house for potential new volunteers and local sponsors. The children were making signs, painting hearts and suns, and their names in crooked letters. One of the younger boys, Dario, clung to my arm and asked, "If I don't have a mom, can I have two?" I smiled, kneeling to his level. "You can have as many people who love you as your heart can hold." He grinned. "Then I pick you second. First is Mr. Henry, but only because he lets me eat 2 cookies." I laughed, and he laughed too. The sound was brighter than anything I'd heard all week. Love didn't need acknowledgement to exist. It didn't need permission either. I walked into the staff room, later set my phone on the windowsill, and watched the kids run laps outside before lunch. It buzzed once more, then stopped. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. If they were reaching out now, it wasn't to pull me in, it was to tug on whatever was left. And I had already sewn that into something warmer than their words would ever be. I didn't need to hear it from Darian to know the house had gone quiet in all the wrong ways. The kind of silence that doesn't settle but simmers. The kind you feel in the tension between footsteps and sighs. I'd lived through it once myself, back when his father and I were still pretending. Distance was just a phase. Word got back to me through a neighbor of all people. Mrs. Connolly, who lived 2 doors down from Darian and Lisette, still stopped by the local pharmacy where I picked up vitamins for the center. She didn't gossip, at least not in the sharp, gleeful way others did, but she noticed things. "I saw your daughter-in-law yesterday," she'd said gently, folding her receipt. She looked tired, not just in the eyes, in the bones. I nodded and smiled like it meant nothing, but inside, I knew the look she described. I'd worn it too. Without me, there was no one to slip into the kitchen before dawn to prep bottles and puree. No one to sort the laundry by instinct or restock the wipes before they ran out. No quiet hands that picked up the chaos before it spilled into resentment. Lisette's mother, the woman I'd been replaced with, had boundaries I never dared set. She liked weekend brunches and manicure appointments. She liked posing with Erin for Instagram, not wiping her down after a diaper blowout. She said she'd help when she could, and when she could never seemed to align with when they needed her most. Darian must have thought it would be easy, that mothers were interchangeable, that gratitude was optional. I imagined him standing in the kitchen one evening, staring at the blinking microwave clock with Erin crying in the next room. No backup, no list of prepped meals in the fridge, just the sound of responsibility loud and constant. That was the kind of noise silence leaves behind. At the center, I stayed busy. We were prepping for the end-of-season community fair, our biggest event of the year. The children were rehearsing a little performance, and I'd been asked to help them with props. I found joy in cardboard crowns and glitter paint. No one asked me where I'd been. They only asked if I'd be here again tomorrow. One morning, while organizing craft bins, I noticed an envelope in my mailbox at the front desk. No return address, no message. Inside was a photo of Erin finger painting. Her hair was in small puffs, cheeks streaked with color. I recognized the shirt. It was one I'd picked up at a secondhand shop last fall, still in good condition. Tucked behind the photo was a note in Darian's handwriting. Short. Crooked. She misses you. No, I'm sorry. No, I was wrong. Just a sentence. As if that alone could fill a silence he'd chosen. I placed the note back in the envelope and slid it into my drawer. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was simply learning. Learning that my presence wasn't a debt they could keep drawing from without offering anything in return. That evening, after story time with the children, I sat on the porch outside the center, listening to the wind rustle through the oak leaves. Someone had tied small wind chimes to the railings. Each note felt like a memory I didn't have to carry, and when the stars came out, I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what Darian was doing. I simply stood stretched and walked back inside. Tomorrow the children would need help finishing their banner, and I would be there. It started as a tickle in my throat light, and scratchy nothing worth mentioning. I blamed the changing weather, the dust from craft paper, or the early mornings. I'd been pushing harder than usual with the community fair so close. A little weariness was expected, but the cough didn't leave. It stayed through the weekend and deepened by Monday, rattling in my chest each time I tried to speak for too long. I waved it off, at first sipped warm water, and sat near the window when the air felt too heavy. The children noticed, of course. They notice everything. Esty brought me a tissue box and placed it next to my chair without a word. Dario offered me one of his prized jelly candies from his snack bag. I pretended to eat it, but kept it in my pocket. That kind of sweetness deserved to last a little longer. On the third day, Miss Laney, the head coordinator, asked me to take a few days off. Just until you get your full voice back, she said, with a tilt of concern behind her usual cheer. I knew what she meant. We couldn't risk a bug spreading through the center. I nodded and packed my things slowly. My hands shook a little when I zipped my cardigan. Back in the motel room, the silence felt unfamiliar, not peaceful like it used to. Still, the center hadn't forgotten me. On the second evening, I heard a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, a paper bag sat on the mat. Inside were 3 crayon drawings, a mason jar of soup, still warm to the touch, and a note, Miss Calvesa, feel better soon. We're saving your chair. I don't remember crying, but I woke the next morning with my cheeks sticky and my pillow damp. The phone rang sometime after lunch. I recognized Darian's number, but let it buzz into silence. He tried again that evening, and again the next morning. I read the transcript of his voicemail, never playing the audio. "Mom, I know you're mad, but I just wanted to check. Lisette's been hard lately. I think Erin asks about you. I don't know how to explain things to her." My fingers hovered over the screen. Explain what exactly? That I was someone who once held her while she cried, but who now existed only in past tense. That I used to know her bedtime songs by heart, but now only got to hum them alone in a quiet room. That night, the cough worsened. I wrapped myself tighter in the quilt I kept by the window and tried to sleep sitting up. The stars outside blurred behind the glass. The next day, another delivery arrived. This time, a bundle of tissue paper flowers and a lopsided card. Inside, "We miss your voice. Don't worry, we didn't forget what it sounds like." I let out a hoarse laugh. My ribs ached from it. The phone buzzed again. I didn't bother to look. I reached for my tea instead. There was no anger left in me, no sharpness. Only a steady kind of quiet that filled the space where grief used to echo. I didn't need apologies anymore. I didn't need explanations or replays of why things unfolded the way they had. I needed rest and warmth and a space where I wasn't only remembered when someone else was failing. I took another sip of soup, letting the warmth settle deep in my chest. When I leaned back, I glanced at the note again. "We're saving your chair." That was enough for now. I was crouched near the shoe bins helping little Mateo tie his laces for the third time that day. He always forgot which loop came first, and I never minded showing him again. His brow was scrunched in fierce concentration tongue, peeking from the corner of his mouth. The knot was still uneven when I heard the creak of the center's main gate. I didn't look up at first. It wasn't uncommon for a delivery van or a curious visitor to wander close. But then I felt the shift, the sudden hush behind me. The kids had paused mid-play. Even Mateo froze his untied laces forgotten. I stood slowly. Beyond the gate stood Darian holding Erin on his hip. His hair was disheveled, his eyes rimmed with red like he hadn't slept or had tried and failed too many times. Erin's little arm clung to his shoulder, her cheek pressed against the side of his face. She looked smaller than I remembered. Our eyes met, only for a second. I didn't move. Instead, I turned back to Mateo and finished tying the laces as neatly as I could. He looked up at me unsure, but I gave him a small smile. "Go ahead now, sweetheart." He ran off without a word, casting a glance toward the gate as he did. Darian didn't speak. He didn't call my name. He just stood there shifting his weight, as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. The sun slanted behind him, casting long shadows that stretched across the gravel. I didn't offer to open the gate. Instead, I walked over to the flower bed beneath the windows and began picking up the plastic watering cans the children had left behind. My hands were steady, though I could feel my pulse in my throat. Behind me, I heard the hinges groan. Miss Laney approached quietly and said something low to him, probably asking if he needed help or if he had an appointment. Her voice stayed even. His didn't rise. Still, I didn't turn. I gathered the empty cans and stacked them by the shed, where I'd always left them. Then I straightened up, brushed dirt from my palms, and headed toward the reading bench. I could feel him watching me the whole time. Erin's voice was small, but I heard it clearly as I passed. "Grandma." My feet stilled for a heartbeat. The weight of that word, it did something to me. Bent something that had been stiff inside like dry branches catching wind. But I didn't turn. I sat on the bench and pulled out a storybook, opening it across my lap, as if the afternoon hadn't changed shape entirely. 2 children approached, sensing the beginning of something familiar, and nestled on either side of me. Their warmth was solid, their trust easy. I began to read. The gate creaked again behind me. I didn't look, but I knew what the sound meant. His hesitation had given way to retreat. The words on the page blurred for a second before sharpening again. "Once upon a time," I said, steadying my breath in a village not so different from ours. and I kept going. I didn't know if he would return or what he'd say if he did, but for that moment, I chose presence over pain. I chose the story. I chose the children who saw me not for what I could give them, but simply because I was there. Aaron's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Grandma. The word lingered as the sun began to dip low behind the trees. The next day, he returned. I had just finished sorting afternoon snack bags in the storage room when I saw him again, this time inside by the entrance hall. One of the staff must have let him through. He wasn't holding Aaron, just his car keys and a slumped kind of posture I hadn't seen since he was a teenager and had failed his driving test. I didn't greet him. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked past and nodded to Miss Laney, letting her know I'd take the lead group for story time. The children had already gathered in the multi-purpose room, a chaotic circle of giggles and anticipation. The moment I stepped in, a few of them rushed over to tug at my sleeves, pointing to their favorite books stacked near the window. He followed. He kept his distance just beyond the doorway, his body half turned like he might walk out again at any second. But he stayed. I settled into the large blue floor cushion and let little Theo climb onto my lap. His hands were sticky with crumbs, but he snuggled into me without hesitation. His trust was effortless, uncomplicated. I opened the book and began to read aloud. The room softened. I didn't glance at Darian, not even when I heard the faint shift of his weight against the doorframe, not even when he sighed. It wasn't until the children had dispersed, pulled away by juice cups and finger paint, that I stood and walked to the cabinet to restock crayons. That's when I felt him near me. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, hands shoved into his pockets, watching as I sorted markers into jars labeled cool and warm. A breath passed between us before he finally said it. "You look..." His voice faltered like he didn't expect to feel the way he did. "You look happy." I didn't answer. There was no accusation in his tone, just something quieter, something I didn't owe a reply to. I placed the last of the crayons in their tray and closed the lid. Then I carried the bin back to the shelf by the window, passing him like a breeze. He followed a few steps behind his words, trailing the way a shadow might follow sunlight. "Mom?" Still, I said nothing. Because what could I say that it was easier here, that I didn't dread waking up, that these children, many of them with no mothers to speak of, saw me more clearly than he had in years, that my laughter here didn't feel borrowed. He lingered, eyes darting around the room as if trying to match it to his idea of who I was, or maybe who he thought I'd be once he came back. But I wasn't waiting. When I bent down to pick up a lone sock someone had left behind, he bent too, as if helping might earn him closeness. We both stood at the same time, and for a moment we were eye to eye. I didn't know he murmured. I nodded once. Not an agreement, just acknowledgement. Then I walked past him toward the coat hooks. I'd promised the kids a walk around the small garden, and a promise made here wasn't something I broke. I took down my cardigan and slipped it on. Darian stayed by the door. I didn't turn back. Didn't need to see his face to know what he was feeling. Some emotions carry weight without volume. Some regrets make more noise in silence than shouted apologies ever could. Outside, the children were already lining up their laughter, floating through the cracked window pane. I stepped into it without hesitation. He was waiting again the next morning. Not at the front gate this time, but sitting on a bench by the garden where the children were watering their rows of zinnias and cucumbers. His shoulders were hunched forward, elbows on knees like he didn't know how to hold himself anymore. I walked past him with a nod to the children, motioning for gentle hands with the watering cans. They listened, Mary Beth especially. Her tiny fingers curled around the green handle, her brow furrowed with concentration. She looked up and waved when she saw me. I waved back. Darian watched all of it, saying nothing. When I crouched beside one of the raised beds to help Lila pull weeds, he stood and moved closer. Not too close. Just enough. I didn't realize you'd be so involved, he said. I didn't respond. I guided Lila's hand to a stubborn root and showed her how to loosen it gently. She giggled when the soil gave way. These kids, they like you a lot. Still nothing from me. Mom, he tried again. I thought you just needed a place to go. A distraction. I straightened, brushed the dirt from my palms and looked him square in the face. They don't need distractions, Darian, I said softly. These kids want a mother, not a maid, not a stand-in, a real one. He blinked. I was a mother to you once I continued. But over the years, I became your convenience, your fallback, your sitter, your ghost in the background. His face twitched at that. I didn't press harder. I didn't need to. These children don't see me that way, I said. They ask me about my day. They draw me pictures. They look for me first when they fall. They don't leave me off the list when it matters. His hands curled slightly at his sides. I didn't mean I know what you meant, I said. You just didn't think I'd leave. The garden around us carried on. Lila found a worm and squealed. Mary Beth giggled and reached for my hand. I knelt beside her, wiping sweat from her brow with the corner of my sleeve. Darian watched her cling to me, not with fear, not out of habit, but with trust. He knelt too, a few feet away. She misses you, he said, his voice catching. We both do. I stroked Mary Beth's hair. Missing someone doesn't undo what you made them feel. He sat in the dirt, then legs folded like a boy. I don't know how to fix it. I didn't tell him how. It wasn't mine to mend. Instead, I smiled at Mary Beth and stood. The sun was warm across my shoulders, and the scent of earth clung to my fingers. I motioned to the children to start gathering tools, and they scattered with laughter. Darian stayed seated in the dirt. He was still there when I led the children inside, still there when I hung the aprons and wiped down the watering cans, still there when I walked back out with a popsicle for each child, Mary Beth skipping beside me. I handed her a pink one and smiled when she offered to share. Darian looked up. She turned to him, extended her little hand, and he took it. Quietly. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. Real motherhood isn't loud. It isn't always blood or duty or sacrifice worn thin. Sometimes it's just showing up and being the one who stays. I turned toward the steps and led the children back inside. The next time Darian showed up, he still came alone, standing awkwardly by the chain-link fence that edged the back playground, while the children took turns pushing one another on the tire swing. I spotted him from the sandbox, where I was helping little Otto bury a plastic dinosaur so it could be fossilized. I didn't go to him. I waited. Eventually, he walked around and let himself in through the side gate as he'd done years ago when visiting our old home. He had that same look in his eyes, nervous, like he wasn't sure if he belonged anymore. That at least was new. He used to stride into rooms like they were owed to him. He stood near the swing-set hands in his jacket pockets. I let him wait, not out of spite. I just needed a few more minutes to finish brushing sand from Otto's sleeves and set the others up with chalk by the wall. Only then did I turn to him. He looked tired. Older. I can help you with the swings, he offered. I shook my head gently. We've got a system now? He nodded, eyes darting to the children. They really do love you here. I folded my arms and waited. Whatever he came to say, it wasn't that. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about that day. When I texted you, my heart beat once hard. I didn't mean it to come out that way, he continued. I thought it was simpler to keep things small, but I realize now I made you feel like you didn't matter. And that's not true. I watched him struggle for the next part. Lips pressed together, throat bobbing. I miss you, he said, voice cracking. And I'm sorry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just raw. I looked at him for a long moment. Let the words settle where they wanted to, not where he expected them to land. Then I spoke. That's not always enough. His face dropped, like he hadn't considered that outcome. I don't say that to be cruel, I added. But you need to understand something, Darian. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I realized I wasn't seen anymore. Not as a person, not as your mother. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. You told me through words and silence that I was optional. And now you're here because things are hard, because Lisette's mother won't help, because it's finally quiet enough to hear my absence. He looked away, blinking fast. I still love you, I said. That hasn't changed. But love doesn't mean I pretend none of this happened. I know, he said quietly. I don't know how to fix it. You start by not expecting me to fix it for you. We stood there for a while, the breeze lifting the corners of my apron. The children's laughter rose and fell behind us like waves. I brought something, he said, finally pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat. Erin drew it. She wanted you to have it. I took it. A crayon drawing me and Erin holding hands, stick legs, and big smiles. A big red heart floating above us. My throat tightened. She misses you more than she knows how to say, he added. I nodded, folding the picture carefully. I'll keep it. He looked at me again this time, not as a son who wanted something, but as someone who knew he'd lost more than he'd realized. I'll be back next week, he said. If that's all right, that's up to you. I turned toward the playground again. There were more shoelaces to tie, more hands to hold. The work didn't stop, neither did the love. But some things needed to be earned back. Slowly, not rushed. Not assumed. And this time, I wasn't going to disappear just to be noticed. He waited until most of the children had gone inside for reading hour. We were sitting on the back step of the center, the autumn sun low behind the trees. I had a mug of warm broth in my hands and a blanket folded across my lap, though I wasn't cold. Darian had come earlier than usual, helped me carry juice boxes into the kitchen, wiped down tables without being asked. There was something slower in him now. Less urgency, more consideration. We didn't speak for a while. I let the silence be gentle. It didn't stretch to punish, just to breathe. I've been thinking, he said, after a long pause. About what you said. About being seen. I looked down at the steam curling from my cup. You were right. I treated you like a fixture, not a person. You did everything and I let it happen without ever asking how you felt. Or even if you wanted to. I said nothing. He wasn't wrong. But the truth didn't sting anymore. It just existed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I was selfish. We both were. Me and Lisette. We thought we were building something better. But we just used the pieces you left behind. I glanced sideways at him. That's quite a thing to admit. He let out a humorless chuckle. I know. Another beat passed. I want you to come home, he said. I know it won't fix everything. I want Erin to have you around again. And I want to do better. With you. I closed my eyes. There was a time I would have said yes without hesitation. A time when the offer of reconciliation was all I ever dreamed of. But that time had passed. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I had started loving myself in a way I hadn't for decades. I appreciate that I said carefully, truly, but I'm not going back. His head turned to me slowly, confusion furrowing his brow. I've built something here, something real. These kids, this community, they didn't wait until it was convenient to see me. They welcomed me when I had nothing but a coat and a casserole pan. His jaw tightened slightly. You'd choose them over your own family. I turned toward him fully. No, I'm choosing me. He looked at me for a long time, processing. I'm not angry anymore, I added. But going back means erasing everything I've worked to reclaim. And I won't do that. Not for guilt, not for comfort, not even for love. He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. I understand, he said at last. Or at least, I'm trying to. We sat for a few minutes longer. Then he stood and reached into his bag. Aaron drew you another picture, he said, placing it beside me on the step. And I told her you can't come back right now, but maybe we could visit you here sometimes. I smiled. That sounds right. He started to turn, then paused. You do look different, you know. Calmer, lighter. Peace will do that to a person. He nodded once, then walked away. I picked up the drawing, Aaron and I, again, this time surrounded by stars. She had written, "I love you," in shaky block letters across the top. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my apron pocket. Then I stood, dusted off my skirt, and went back inside, where one of the little ones had started crying over a snapped crayon. There was always something that needed tending. And now, finally, I had the strength and the choice to tend to what mattered. The next time they came, it was quieter. No grand apologies. No emotional declarations. Just a knock at the back gate near the herb garden. And when I opened it there, they were Darian, with a thermos in one hand, and Aaron, half hiding behind his legs, gripping a folded piece of paper. He didn't say much at first, just offered the thermos with a small nod. "Tea," he said. "Chamomile and mint. Not from a box." I raised an eyebrow. "Homemade from the farmer's market," he admitted. But I picked the stall. I let the smallest smile tug at my lips. "Come on in." Aaron clung to him as they walked beside me through the short hallway. She didn't speak until we reached the bench under the willow in the courtyard. I sat first. Darian hesitated, then took the opposite end. Aaron stood between us for a moment, then climbed onto the space beside me. I let her settle, not leaning too far, not pulling her close, just being present. After a moment, she held out the paper. "I drew you a tree," she said, "because you're strong." I took the paper gently. It was covered in bold strokes of green and brown roots that wrapped deep branches that reached across the top edge. In the trunk, she'd drawn a small heart. "It's beautiful," I said. She beamed, then leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. We stayed like that for a while, 3 breaths moving in different rhythms bound by something unspoken. Eventually, Darian stood. He looked down at us, his hands in his coat pockets. "We should get going," he said softly. "But she really wanted to see you." I nodded. Erin turned toward me, her little hands tugging at the sleeve of my cardigan. "Will you come back with us sometime?" she asked. I looked into her eyes. "No, sweetheart. But you can always come see me." She didn't cry. She simply reached out and wrapped her arms around my waist. I held her there gently and pressed a kiss to her hairline. "You are loved," I whispered. "Always. You are kind and smart and brave, and you're going to grow so tall the sky won't believe it." She giggled, and I could feel it against my ribs. Then I looked up at Darian and slowly, gently passed her back into his arms. "You're her father," I said. "You always were." He took her carefully like I had just placed a crown in his hands. There was no resentment in my voice, no tension, just truth. He nodded, voice thick. "Thank you." I didn't reply. I just watched as he adjusted her scarf and whispered something in her ear before turning toward the path. They left together, hand in hand. I sat back down on the bench. The drawing lay on my lap, soft edges curling with the breeze. I folded it once, twice, and tucked it into the inside pocket of my vest. The wind shifted. Somewhere inside, I heard children laughing. Someone had spilled beads across the floor again. I stood slowly and headed in, letting the gate close gently behind me. It started with an empty patch of dirt by the fence, nothing more than stubborn clay and stray weeds. I had passed it dozens of times, always thinking it deserved something more. One morning, after the last frost had finally broken, I brought out a small spade and a tray of seedlings I'd picked up at the co-op market. I didn't announce what I was doing. I just knelt down and began turning the earth. By the time I had dug my 3rd hole, a quiet shadow fell across the patch. Then a voice behind me said, "What's that one?" I turned slightly. It was Pilar, one of the older girls, holding her notebook with one hand and a plastic watering can with the other. Zinnias, I replied. Tough little flowers. They bloom long into the summer. She knelt beside me. Can I try? By mid-morning, we had an audience. Erin came skipping across the lawn, her hair tied in 2 crooked braids. She didn't ask if she could help. She just dropped to her knees beside Pilar and reached for the tray of plants. A few others trickled over from the reading circle, then more from the swing set. Soon the whole plot was a sea of clumsy hands and dirt-smudged knees. I watched them press small roots into soil, pat down mounds with care only children could offer. Each flower went in crooked, imperfect, but loved. As I adjusted a marigold near the edge, I heard the soft creak of the garden gate behind me. I didn't need to look up. I knew the rhythm of his footsteps by now. Darian stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes scanning the scene. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. I didn't speak, and neither did he not right away. It was Pilar who broke the silence, tugging gently at my elbow. Miss Calvesa, is this enough space for all the flowers? I nodded. It's not about the space. It's about where they'll grow best. I saw Darian glance at me, then his brow furrowing just slightly. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. After the last flower was pressed into place and the soil watered, I rose and wiped my hands on my apron. The kids scattered, eager for their next activity, their laughter rising like birdsong. Darian stepped forward, hesitating near the patch. It's beautiful, he said. I didn't answer. He looked down at the zinnias and marigolds, then up at me again. You've made something here. I nodded. Something that didn't ask me to shrink. He didn't flinch, but I saw his throat move a swallow caught mid-thought. I didn't know how much you needed this, he said. I didn't know either, I replied. Not until I gave it room to breathe. He looked down again, eyes on Erin, who had returned to draw faces on the garden signs with a marker. She talks about you all the time now. Says you tell better stories than the library lady. I smiled. I only speak from truth. He gave a small laugh, soft and unsteady. That's what I'm learning. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't reach for his arm or tell him everything was okay. Instead, I knelt again and pressed my palm to the warm earth beside the final bloom. I'm glad you came, I said. And I meant it, not because I wanted him to fix anything, but because it mattered that he saw what I had chosen. Not just a garden, not just these children, but myself. I didn't remember writing it. Not the words, not the day, not the storm that must have been inside me when the pen met paper. But there it was. I'd been sorting the old file box I brought with me from the house. It had mostly practical things, insurance paperwork, my social security card, a few recipes I knew by heart, but kept anyway. And tucked beneath them in a small envelope without a stamp was the letter. The envelope was yellowed, the ink a little smudged in the corners. My handwriting had looked steadier then, but I could feel the tremor behind every sentence. I slid the paper out slowly, not sure whether to read it or rip it in half, but something told me to look. I sat by the window, the afternoon sun, catching dust in the air, and unfolded the pages. It wasn't a long letter, just 4 paragraphs. No salutation, no sign-off. It was raw. I told him how it felt when he started calling me extra, how it stung when Lisette would roll her eyes at my casseroles, or when they'd leave me out of family plans and call it a miscommunication. I told him about the night I heard them laughing in the living room while I folded their laundry upstairs invisible. I confessed how I stayed because I thought maybe love in its quiet persistence would be enough to earn my place. And I wrote one line I couldn't take my eyes off of. If I disappeared, would you even notice by dinner? It felt like someone else's voice now, a ghost of the woman I'd once been. I folded the letter again, slower this time, and rose. Outside, the flowers we'd planted swayed gently in the early evening breeze. The garden was quiet, most of the kids inside for dinner. Aaron playing with sidewalk chalk near the fence. I knelt by the edge of the garden bed where a small stone ring served as a fire pit for camp nights. I didn't announce what I was doing. I struck a match, held it steady, and watched the flame kiss the corner of the paper. It caught quickly. The edges curled and darkened, then fell inward, the words shrinking into memory, into silence. I fed it slowly, making sure every piece turned to ash. I didn't cry. There had been enough tears shed for that version of me, the woman who waited, the woman who begged silently to be remembered. The fire whispered as it faded, and I pressed the back of my hand to the warm stones before standing. Behind me, I heard small feet padding across the path. Aaron's voice was soft. "Are you making s'mores?" I turned and smiled, brushing the soot from my fingers. "Not tonight, sweetheart. Just saying goodbye to something I don't need anymore." She looked thoughtful, then nodded. "Okay. Want to help me draw a house?" I took her hand. And as we walked back toward the chalk and the laughter and the glow of the porch light ahead, I felt lighter. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I'd stopped carrying what no longer belonged to me. I don't remember how many times Aaron had called me Grandma by then, only that this one felt louder than the rest. I was kneeling by the craft table helping Marisol arrange her popsicle stick castle walls when a blur of motion burst through the hallway. Her little shoes squeaked against the linoleum, her laughter bouncing off the walls like sunlight. "Grandma," she yelled, voice high and certain. I turned just as she barreled into my arms, nearly knocking a bottle of glue from the table. I caught her easily, the way only a woman used to lifting toddlers can, and held her against my chest for a moment longer than necessary. Behind her, Darian stood near the doorway, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. He gave me a nod. It had become a rhythm. Every Saturday morning, Aaron would appear at the gate with Darian. She'd stay until early afternoon, running wild with the other children curling up beside me during story hour, sneaking extra crackers from the snack tray when he thought I wasn't looking. She helped water the garden, drew chalk outlines of rocket ships on the front path, and once asked if she could stay forever. I told her gently that she had a home, but that here she always had a place too. Darian and me never spoke of what came before. There were no late-night phone calls, no drawn-out conversations in the kitchen about forgiveness or guilt. I think we both understood that some bridges aren't rebuilt, they're rerouted. The children had stopped asking why Aaron came and went. She belonged in the way only children understand, by how she shared crayons, by how she knew where the nap mats were stored, by how she clung to my hand without needing permission. One afternoon, Aaron sat beside me with a stack of construction paper. "Draw your family," I said, handing her a marker. She hummed, then began sketching with deliberate focus. 2 tall figures, one shorter. A house. A sun with exaggerated rays. When she held it up, I saw it clearly. The figure with curly hair and an apron was labeled Grandma. "Is that me?" I asked. She nodded, grinning. "You live in the garden house." I kissed her forehead and smoothed the paper edges flat on the table. At the end of each visit, when Darian came to pick her up, Aaron would run into his arms with a wave over his shoulder, and I would return inside, not aching, not empty, but full. This wasn't the life I once imagined. There were no family portraits above a mantel, no holiday feasts with everyone in matching sweaters, but there was warmth and laughter, and the steady rhythm of footsteps down the hallway from children who saw me, really saw me. I had become a mother again, not because someone needed me to fill a gap or because I'd been guilted into caregiving, but because I chose to show up, to stay, to pour love into places that welcomed it freely. And in doing so, I finally came home to myself.